Why don't we go ahead and get started with, I think unless you've been living under a rock, you probably heard the term Internet of Things and big data. So why don't we start with just an update. In 2014, maybe you can start off by just, in simple layman's terms, describing to me what Internet of Things means to you and to your company or whatever you're up to. So open it up. Anyone can start. Luke, you look like you're itching to talk.
Is this on? Okay, yeah, so for us, Internet of Things means connecting every device. Currently everyone has a cell phone, and it's a bit annoying if you meet someone who doesn't have a cell phone. And I think at some point in the future, that's probably not very far in the future, it's going to be the same for every product you buy. Not just necessarily electronic products, but even, even the packaging for your products may be connected ultimately, and our aim is to try and make that happen.
So for me, I think that if you look at the IT industry, maybe from the very beginning of it, most of the technologies started as, here's the answer, what's the question? And we kind of worked our way back to it. And I think that for Internet of Things and for big data, I think the one word that we are now is it's time to deliver. It's time to give answers. It's time to give value to really the people that need it. And if we look at the business, then we need to give to provide the business insights. The technology, the big data, the sensors are all nice, extremely complicated, but that's not the point. The point is to provide the end answers. And I think that that's where we are. That's the update. The update is that we gone enough and we experienced enough as an industry, not as a specific just company. I think we played with the building blocks enough, and I think that we are ready to start providing solutions and answers. So.
Yeah, nothing really to add to what Sven already elaborated on in his talk. Maybe just to follow up on what he did. I mean, obviously for a company such as Siemens, who has that huge expertise built over 150 years and so in building the hardware, in building trains and transport systems and power generations and power grids and healthcare systems and so on, we've always over the last decade worked on making these systems more intelligent and smarter, so they are more efficient and more flexible and so on. But now a real revolution is starting, and that is with everything becoming connected with everything, and with that huge amount of data that's being generated by all those sensors, and by that immense increase in intelligent network devices that will penetrate basically everything. They will be in our watches, and they will be in our cars, and they will be in our machines, and in our houses, and in our clothing, and just everything. And making intelligent use of that data, I think that's the real challenge for the Internet of Things. I saw that in a really interesting report by IDC the other day that forecasts that the data volume by the end of the decade will grow, I think, 50-fold to something like 40 zettabyte. I mean, that's one of these incredible numbers that has 20 zeros or so. So there will be that huge amount of data. But what's actually happening right now is that only 3% or less than 3% of all that data that's out there is intelligently used. So it's being analyzed. It's delivering intelligent outcomes. And that's actually what the Internet of Things will have to be. I mean, to make intelligent use of that data so we can have our infrastructures, our manufacturing systems, our power grids more flexible and more intelligent.
You're looking at me? I don't know what the Internet of Things is. You should ask these guys.
Okay, all right. So if I were to extract some of the themes here, and I'll just make a general observation, right? Up until now, if you go to most of the conferences, they've always had the Internet of Things panel, and then they have the big data panel, right? And this is actually the first panel I've been on where the two are combined. Right, and if I kind of press on that, what I'm hearing, particularly from you two, is this notion of being able to do actually useful things with it, right? Not necessarily just walking around and showing people all these cool devices and collecting all this data, but actually figuring out how to use it, right? So maybe you guys can comment on as you sit here in 2014, why do you think generally we're starting to talk about the combination of Internet of Things and big data? And maybe you can give us some anecdotes or examples of some of the things you guys have seen that illustrate the power when you put those two together. It's almost like 1 + 1 = 3.
Maybe I'm going to start. I mean, what we see already in the world of manufacturing is we are very much advanced. I mean, everybody's talking about manufacturing 4.0 or industry 4.0. So basically the whole process of manufacturing, from the first stage of product design to building the assembly line to procurement and distribution processes and so on, is all being mirrored online before it's actually being built. And that makes the whole world of manufacturing so much more efficient, brings time to market down by 50% compared to traditional methods, and so on and so forth. So there's a revolution already underway. If you look into what I'm doing, working on urban infrastructure, when manufacturing is talking about 4.0, public urban infrastructure is maybe at 1.5 or something like that. There's that huge efficiency potential in power grids, in transportation systems, in building technologies to bring emissions down, to bring energy usage down, to make to increase capacity, to get more cars through the roads and more trains through the tunnels and all that. And that's increasingly being seen now, that the world of manufacturing is so far ahead and that the world of infrastructure is so far behind, and that has reasons, obviously, because decisions on public infrastructure are more like political decisions, so the whole decision-making process takes longer, and cities per se don't like to experiment that much, and so on. But now, the world of public infrastructure is actually waking up, seeing the potential and starting to work on that. And that's what we are seeing. And this is why over the last year or so, the whole discussion around smart cities and so has become such a vivid discussion and now leads to very tangible outcomes already, with a huge potential still to be tapped.
So perhaps I'll just complete the story and take it from the point that you stopped into the public infrastructure. So let's assume I'm the mayor of a smart city and I decided to implement 1 million sensors around the city. Now, this is nothing new. I could have implemented 1 million sensors in the 60s if I wanted to, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. The thing is that every sensor has a tendency to generate data. So let's assume that I installed 1 million sensors. Each sensor sends 1 data point per second. So every second I have 1 million data points. Times 60, I mean minutes and so on. So this is Internet of Things. And Internet of Things is nothing new. However, now I have the cloud, which means that I don't have necessarily to have the hardware resources that Siemens has or BMW has in order to receive the data. Now, once I receive the data, what do I do with it? That's why I have big data engines. They will take the numbers and crunch them. And for example, we look for all the sensors that are giving me data that is beyond a threshold that I see as an error, because I decided that. And after 5 seconds, I will get an answer. And this answer will go into my BI system, and my BI system will draw a nice pie chart and will give me and will help me to make decisions, which are the entire and the most important reason that I even started with this, right? To get data and to make decisions. So this is perhaps just the ability that all of us actually have now in our fingertips.
So I think one of the things that I've really seen over the last 6 months is that we've moved from the kind of top-down forecasting that starts every presentation saying, oh, there are going to be 20 billion IoT devices in 2020, which is interesting, but doesn't really tell you how you're going to get there. And we're now starting to get some really good bottom-up vertical applications that actually have value for people. I was at an event yesterday in Washington talking to a fire chief from Montgomery County, and he was saying that in his county, which is about 1 million people, there have unfortunately been 4 fire deaths so far this year, and 2 of them were partly attributable to the fact that the batteries had run out on the smoke detectors in the person's home. And basically, so we're working with them now to actually provide connectivity for all of the smoke detectors in city-owned property. And that should completely eliminate that problem, because if the batteries run out, they can send someone round to, it's usually seniors in actual fact they're dealing with, and replace the batteries. It's an incredibly simple thing, and only requires a small amount of data in order to make it work, but it provides huge value. And I think that's one small application. There are probably 1 million more like that.
I guess a lot of this is sounding kind of aspirational rather than current. And so I don't know if things have changed or not. I remember around the turn of the century, was it Microsoft that had that business at the speed of thought slogan? And it would show like, kind of these manufacturing processes where everything would come together and blah, blah, blah. And remember in the late 90s, everybody was building an internet-connected fridge. I don't know. So I don't know, like...
So you think it's all hype? Or we're overhyping it?
Yes and no. I mean, like, these terms like big data and Internet of Things and smart cities, I mean, these are marketing terms, right? They came out of marketing departments from big companies. In a sense, I find them a bit of a distraction. Why do I care about the size of the data? I mean, what's an internet if it's not got things on it? It's certainly not an internet of people. But on the other hand, I feel like we're underhyping things that really do matter, I mean, so you mentioned I'm pretty interested in healthcare, and I'm interested in healthcare because genuinely we have technology now which can look at an image of a breast cancer and tell better than a pathologist what to do about it, And so I feel like there's some stuff we're underhyping and some stuff we're overhyping and some stuff that's a distraction. This idea of like having more things and more data, which is what Internet of Things and big data terms seem to imply, is in danger of causing us to buy stuff from vendors rather than focus our interest on the areas of highest impact, maybe.
Yeah, look, I tend to agree with you. Sometimes things get overhyped, marketers hijack, certain terms. But that's kind of what panels like this are meant to try to suss out, right? Try to figure out, separate the hype from the reality. And so one of the things I kind of throw out to all of you is maybe you can talk about some specific examples of something that you personally have used or friends have used or products that you admire or services that you admire, that you think would not have been able to exist, prior to 2014 or the current environment because of the combination of technology, combination of hardware, software, cloud services, et cetera. Because I think that's one way, at least for me, to separate the hype from the reality.
Or can we show the opposite? I mean, like I think about all the stuff that, we've bought in our household. We've had a sleep detector headband called a Zeo, which they went out of business. Yep. We've got 1,000 Jawbone apps lying around the house which we don't know what to do with. We have Wemo switches on our walls which spend more of their time upgrading firmware than actually turning our lights on and off.
Right.
I don't know, like there's more of this stuff appearing and I always buy it because I want to see what I can do with it. But I certainly haven't personally experienced that, oh wow, it's all coming together and making my life wonderful moment.
Right. I'm going to come back to you on that. But before that, do you guys have any other examples that really capture your imagination and go like, wow, this is why this is not just a complete bunch of hype?
I've got one actually. It might not fall slightly outside that category, but has everyone got a dog in the audience?
Dog?
So basically we have a customer who are making a product for dogs that you wouldn't be able to make prior to the Internet of Things and prior to some kind of custom software for it. And it's essentially a tiny device, a bit like a name tag that you clip to the dog's collar. And if you lose your dog, you can press a button on your smartphone and it activates the device and it tells you where the dog is. And okay, you would be able to do that. In the past, putting that together in the past would basically involve making a small cell phone and hanging it around your dog's neck. And you'd have to charge it up every day or at least every week. But this device, because of new IoT technologies, it costs like $50. And you can use it anywhere, and the batteries will last for months rather than days. So I actually don't have a dog at the moment, but people who...
I can see use for my small children, though.
I think that might be an area of diversification for them.
Maybe another very concrete example from what Siemens does. We have a so-called remote service platform where around 250,000 devices all over the world are being connected to. And that is anything from traffic lights to transport systems to computer tomographs to power plants, wind farms, etc., etc. So we constantly gather and monitor data from all those systems that Siemens has implemented all over the world and that are being used. Now all that historic data is being fed into neural networks, and all those devices learn from that historic data. For instance, the power plants or wind farms learn on how to better react to specific weather panels and to become even more efficient under these conditions based on all the historic data that we fed into the system. Or a power plant automatically flags up when a part needs to be replaced, because based on the analysis of the historic data, we can predict that, so we can bring downtime down. So that's all very, very tangible outcomes already, and intelligently using those data can incredibly increase efficiency already in all these infrastructure systems out there. So it's not just talk. It's already happening.
Yeah, perhaps one example, and that's something that, we all have a lot of, most of us would have a lot of gadgets and phones and sensors and stuff, but one thing that just works for me is actually Google Now. I don't know if some of you are using it, but this is a little service that runs on either iOS or Android, and I find it very helpful. So suddenly there's a pop-up that tells me, hey, for your next meeting, you should leave 10 minutes ahead because there's an accident on the 85, and if you won't leave 10 minutes ahead, you will be late. And it does it without, approved it to be working, but other than that, I'm not doing anything. So when smart products like this predict what I need and actually gives me value all the time, I think that that's something that's probably hard to believe that, we didn't see it just a year or 2 years ago, so.
So I'd like to come back to Jeremy's point. Let's just assume that we are all an anomaly, and everyone here is an anomaly, and the average person doesn't really use any of this stuff, and it doesn't see a lot of utility. Let's take the aspirational view. If to make this a reality, right? What are some of the ingredients that you think are missing, right? Sounds like you've had some poor, user experience in general. The products aren't very good, but just walk us through, based on your experience, what are some of the key ingredients that you think need to be there in order for us to realize a world, maybe somewhat aspirational, where everything's connected, everything works on the fly, and we're all basically just sitting home doing nothing.
Actually, Dan and Stefan's examples were really revealing, right? So Stefan's example was actually really talking about the value of machine learning. It's about literally using, both two examples were using historic data to learn how to improve what you do. And Dan's example was not about Internet of Things, it was about convergence into mobile devices, right? I would say these are the two. We don't have to be very aspirational about that, because we've all experienced this all the time, right? When you use Google Translate to read something that was in French, or you use Google Now or whatever to, tells you that you're late for DLD and you have to go, or you use Facebook and it tells you with machine learning, maybe you should connect up with this friend that you forgot. So I think there's actually amazingly powerful things going on right now in those two areas, and I think the possibilities are limitless there. Think about where did you see Skype? Now, Microsoft now has Skype. You can speak into it in English, and at the other end they'll hear it in German. Yeah. This stuff's kind of mind-blowing, right? And
it's Star Trek.
Yeah. So I would say I don't need to think about what happens when every device is speaking to each other. I just say when you have mobile convergence plus machine learning, we can see what's happening right now. It's bringing us together as human beings, and it's kind of making life so much more productive and easier and pleasant already, and it's going to increase exponentially.
But clearly something is missing, right? Like not all of us have 10 internet connected devices, on our body and in our house at all times, with doing work for us, right? So do you think it's more a function of the actual user experience, so the user design, the end product, where there still needs to be a lot more innovation? Because I agree with you, a lot of the infrastructure is there. Right, you got the platform layer, you got the cloud services, you got the data, right? You even have a lot of the machine learning there. Is really the last mile, that last user interface, where the innovation is still suffering.
At the end of the day, it's all about the consumer, and people really need to make intelligent use of the data. And we have a very interesting example, which is quite eye-opening. It's a pilot project on smart grids that we do together with IBM and the European Union in the island of Bornholm, which is a Danish island. And there, a smart grid has been installed, so we know much better through the use of meter and data what kind of power is consumed by whom, what for, at what time. So we have all the data available to better manage the system in a more energy efficient way. Now what we've done there is we've clustered the households there in 4 categories. One category of household just got the meter, so they know what kind of power they consume. Another category of household got the meter plus an online device, so they can constantly monitor online how they. I think you have that on your iPhone as well, so they at any point in time they can see how much energy their house uses. And then there's 2 other categories, one equipped by Siemens and one by IBM, where all their data is all being linked to automated, intelligent building technology systems. And now we looked at how has the energy consumption of all those 4 categories of household changed. And interestingly enough, the first 2 categories that just had the information, it didn't make a big difference. People didn't really make use of that information for whatever reason. May it be just inertia, or may it be that the overall proportion of money they spend on their energy bill is too small to give them an incentive to react or whatever. So the whole intelligence that's been put in place there didn't really make that much of a difference. Now the last 2 categories, where all those data were linked to automated systems, so where heating and cooling in the houses was automatically switched on and off in a more intelligent way, and household appliances, some jobs were being put into the night when energy is cheaper and so on. There, where all the hassle was taken away from the individual, then it did make a difference, and a big difference, actually, in terms of energy efficiency. So it is, again, about not bombarding people with data that they might not want to use. It is actually taking the hassle away from them through intelligent system and take on all those jobs that people don't really want to think about in an automated way.
So perhaps I'll give two different examples. I think that there are some areas where we're not there yet. Perhaps we'll be there in 6 months or a year, but it's just too complicated, too technical. You need to be a geek and engineer to do this. And in some area, we already, all of us using it. So if you go to Netflix gives you very good suggestions. And it's almost scary how good they are in many cases. This is big data. This is computers talking to each other, in a way, Internet of Things, and make a decision. Sorry?
You're talking about Netflix?
For example, suggestions there.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix is actually a good example of something that's not big data. So their engineers actually released a graph a while ago showing that as you add more recommendation data to the Netflix algorithm, how much better does it get? And it turns out you only need a tiny fraction of their data to get a really good answer. So I mean, this is actually an example of where the power is in the algorithm, not in the quantity of the data.
I agree. Perhaps the only big data there is just the ability to crunch a lot of data that comes in from so many sources, but this is more algorithmic. If you go to Facebook or to Google+, the feeds and what you see there is getting more and more relevant because it's getting more and more smarter. He knows he has a lot of data about what you've done before, and he makes smarter decisions about what to display. So, of course, e-commerce sites are getting better as well. On the other side, the sensor, the Fitbits, the Nests, all of this stuff, Nest is an example of something that is relatively easy, but most of it is, I believe, just 1 or 2 steps ahead of the customer. It's more B2B than B2C right now.
So I'd say if we want to get to the point where we have 10 devices per person, then a couple of things are clear. I mean, one is that it's got to be incredibly easy to use, and not just for techies, but for everybody. And I don't think it's there yet. I think there's quite a lot that needs to be done still. People find it difficult to put the right access code into their Wi-Fi in order to get a connection to a home hub. And that for techies that's really easy. But once you start getting out into the mass market, that becomes a huge problem. And then the other thing is cost. The only thing that we've, as technology industry, has successfully connected up full time so far are cell phones. And a cell phone, a smartphone costs $500. And probably, about $100 of that, or $70 of it, is the technology that connects it to the internet. So that works for smartphones because people pay so much every month for their smartphone contract. But if you want to get consumer products, that's difficult. I'd quite like my coffee machine to be connected to the internet, for example. So when I'm about to run out of coffee, it reorders it, and I don't have a morning where I don't have my coffee. But the coffee machine bill of materials is probably like $10. And so if you have to then put a $70 module in it to get it connected to the internet, well, yeah, okay, you could theoretically do that. You probably could 10 or 15 years ago. But that's one, it's a really obvious point, but I think it's one of the real barriers that's stopping applications like that from happening.
So let's go off on a little bit of a tangent here. So, there's just been an enormous amount of acquisition activity in and around this area. If you include general hardware companies with an internet subscription or internet service, companies like Beats and Nest. And I remember when those transactions were happening, relatives of mine who don't live in Silicon Valley called me up and go like, what the hell is going on? Like, why are these guys paying this kind of money for a headphone company and a thermostat company? So I throw it out to all of you, and obviously don't comment on transactions related to the companies you're involved with, but how do you explain this to your relative that isn't here in this ecosystem? Why are these companies paying this enormous amount of money for what on the face of it look like very basic companies?
I can't really make a judgment on whether the amounts of money that are being spent on these acquisitions are too much or too less or just right. But one thing is really interesting. I mean, it shows that the whole hardware expertise becomes increasingly important again. I mean, 5 years ago, this was all old world, and nobody would have cared about expertise, domain expertise in specific hardware or infrastructure technologies. Now, with the Internet of Things, it's the expertise in both worlds that counts and that makes you successful. You have to understand the data, you have to understand your algorithms, and you have to be able to intelligently handle all those data, but you also have to understand the hardware, the things behind, and you have to understand the user of those data, of those technologies, what their requirements and their specific purposes are. And only if you can intelligently combine the two worlds, then you become successful in the Internet of Things. And that these high premiums are now being paid for companies that are in the hardware business, and premiums that were only paid for software companies a couple of years ago, shows that that convergence of the two worlds is actually underway.
You guys have anything to add?
No, I think that's absolutely spot on about hardware becoming more important. Yeah.
So do you think just taking this to it's extreme, right? I'm just saying this to be extremist, but do you think that we're going to see, some amazing, transactions in other areas where companies are battling for that last mile user? Are we going to see somebody that, networks all our coffee machines, and get paid an incredible amount of money, or the living room, or other areas? I mean, do you think that's going to be par for the course? That's just going to be more and more the case rather than the exception going forward, because the internet, data, sensors are all going in all these different directions beyond the mobile phone, beyond the PC?
It's very hard and impossible, at least for me, to predict the future. But I can talk about the trend that I see. Just 5 years ago, when we talked about Internet of Things, a smart home, we said, yeah, we will have 5 years from now, we'll have a smart home. The windshields will come off. The air conditioning will know what I'm thinking about, and the fridge will make my coffee before I even think about it. And I think that this thing, we pretty much understand that it was too high, too up there, And exactly what you talked about, you need to figure it out. It's a lot of expertise. It's a lot of expertise about UX, about how to do it right, about hardware, about software, about going to the market correctly. So I think that what we'll see is everything developing really slowly, figuring it out step by step. And maybe the smart coffee machine will be the next one, maybe something else will be the next one, but I don't think we'll see a boom of everything is talking to everything and changing our life in one time. It's going to take its time, one step after the other.
I think that's right. I think really we're kind of at the equivalent level of maturity of the IoT as the cell phone market was in 1985. You know, where the cell phones existed, they were called car phones, and people were driving around with car phones. The car phone business was probably a really good business, you know, and if you ask the guys involved in that industry at the time, they probably would have predicted more and more car phones, and eventually every car having a phone. Of course, things worked out in a very different way to that, and the opportunity ended up being much bigger with, you know, cell phones and everyone having a cell phone. So 10 years from now, we'll probably be looking back in the same way about the Internet of Things.
Do we have time to open up for questions? Does anyone have any questions for the audience? Oh, there's a question here.
You already talked about how there's going to be more and more data. Do you see that being stored in order to then analyze? How do you even store the exponentially growing data, or will it simply vanish?
So the question is around how do you store all this data? I mean, it's exploding exponentially. So where does all this data go? Where does it get stored?
We absolutely have to store that data because in the end, I mean, you don't need all of it in its original form, and this is really the trick, right? Although it's growing in terms of the amount of it very quickly, we're also getting much better at using machine learning algorithms which can extract the interesting parts out of it. And it's early days with this technology, but there's no question in my mind that that's where things are going. So we'll figure out the ways to keep the interesting nuggets of information without storing the exponentially increasing amount of it. But really to leverage, you know, these machine learning algorithms, which is actually behind a substantial percentage of the stuff we've all talked about on the panel, that requires learning from history. And so you have to have data under a wide range of different situations for those algorithms to actually be resilient and effective.
So how do you know at a given point which elements will be interesting to you, let's say, 3 months or 3 years from now?
Question is, how do you know at any given point which elements are going to be interesting to you in the future? So basically, how do you know what data to store? Because you know you're going to need it later on.
You could probably store it all, because the amount of data from the IoT is small compared with, say, video. You know, if you work out, like for smart metering, for example, 600,000 smart meters connected and sending data back is one person watching Netflix. So, you know, ultimately, there probably will be an enormous amount of data from the IoT, but not for a while.
I think there's basically two aspects to the Internet of Things. One is making all that real-time information available, so you can more quickly react to disruptions or so. You can reroute traffic flows when the congestion is coming up, or when you can reroute power if the grid's distorted or so. So that's all about the immediate reaction. But then historic data also becomes increasingly important, because based on historic data, neural networks can learn. And they can make the future world even better. So it is important to have all those historic data, wherever they will be stored. I mean, it'll probably be the cloud. I mean, no company or no infrastructure provider so will have the capacities to store those data in-house. It'll probably all happen on the cloud. But that we make intelligent use, not just of the real-time data that we get in, but of historic data is pivotally important to the Internet of Things.
Well, I mean, one thing we've got a lot better at in the last few years is really better creating and utilizing a hierarchy of storage, going from expensive and fast and indexed down to cheap and slow, you know. I mean, so for example, the nice thing about the cloud now is that the cloud has many of these layers explicitly available. So you can use Amazon Glacier, which, as the name suggests, is very, very slow, but it's also very, very cheap. And so for your kind of, oh, I don't think we're going to need this, it can go there. Or for the raw form, and you think you've already captured the features in a really smart way, you can keep the raw form there. And then, then you've got hard disks, and then you've got SSD, and then you've got battery-backed RAM, and then you've got cache, and so forth. So, I don't think the storage is going to be a huge issue. We're getting pretty good at that, I think.
Any other questions from the audience? I got one last question, and then we'll wrap up. Relate to this whole storage. So, privacy, is that just going to be the roadkill on the way to the future? Because obviously one of the challenges in all this is that the more internet-enabled devices we have, particularly on our body, the more personalized information we're going to be deeding over to the cloud somewhere, which exposes it to hackers and whatnot. So how should people just generally be thinking about privacy? Is it like, look, that's just the price of admission, or is that a major issue that we're all going to have to deal with, particularly when some bad actor figures out a way to tap into all this?
It turns out that a good half of those, NSA programs specifically are hooked into Google, Yahoo, Facebook data centers. If you have something installed locally, I mean, it's not Google's fault, right? I mean, but this is the facts that we now have, is that most of the programs that exist are tapping into the infrastructure of the cloud providers. So if I used to be like you, I actually used to run the kind of a pre-cloud synchronized email service called Fastmail, and I said to my customers, it'd be crazy to run your own server because I'm doing it better than you. But I think the facts have changed. If you run your own equipment in-house, you don't have NSA installing wiretapping equipment behind your walls, most probably. But we do know that they're actually doing that, attached to the cables that go to Yahoo's data centers.
Just from, again, from infrastructure point of view, because that's the only thing that I'm specialized at this discussion, I think that from my knowledge, when a system is connected this way or another to the internet, the laws of security are identical between on-premise connected to the internet, through firewall, through anything else, and cloud system connected to the internet. I don't see a big difference.
You're right conceptually. I'm just saying the actual focus of the actual security organizations we now know is focusing their attention on the centralized areas, which, that's just good practices. So I agree conceptually, but in terms of where we see the programs being targeted, they're on the areas of concentration.
But I guess just coming back to my original, premise of my question, and then trying to get the answer most relevant for the people in the audience, many of whom are entrepreneurs, is that should we assume, and I'm just saying this to be controversial, should we just assume that the average consumer is just going to become numb to this? They can say, you know what, the NSA is snooping on me. My data is, it may be more secure generally, but it's always susceptible to hacking. But the benefits of having all my stuff networked to the web are just so awesome, it doesn't matter. I guess that's what I'm asking.
To be honest, I don't think it. I think we are only at the start of a discussion about data privacy. This whole topic will become a very, very, very important topic over the decades to come, and people will start worrying more about it. We've seen cases already here in the United States where, house security systems have been hacked, and private scenes of private people's lives ended up on the internet. And these things will happen more, and these will raise concerns about how data is being used. And we will also need to have a discussion about Chinese walls, so we make sure that the data in the system are only used for that specific purpose that they are meant for. To give you an example, one of the great things we did for the City of London is the London congestion charge, where whenever you drive by car into the inner city of London, you have to pay a toll, and that's all highly automated and very intelligent, and your number plate's being read automatically, it's all being booked from your account automatically, prices vary according to the time of the day you drive into the city, so it's a very, very data-intensive system. And we had to make very sure that all those data that we collect there are only used for the tolling. And obviously the London police would be very, very interested in having those data, because you know who's driven into the city at what time. So that would be highly valuable information for them. But no, they can't get them. And these kind of discussions we will need to have, and I'm sure we will have.
Okay, on that note, sounds like we're going to have another panel on that one. I think we'll wrap it up unless there are any other questions, but I'd like to thank my panelists today, and thanks everyone for sticking around.